Imagine you are given a slip of paper, and on this paper there are several scenarios in which you have to make a decision. One might be you are going to hang out with a friend one weekend, but your other friend, who gets typically pretty jealous when you hang out with other people, calls you up and asks what you're doing that night. Do you lie and have fun with your other friend, or do you let them know what's going on and suffer the consequences later? Or a terrorist is holding a gun to your head and says, if you denounce Christ, I will let you live, or I will let your family live but kill you. But if you profess Christ, I will kill your family but let you live. What do you do? Or you have the choice of whether going to a football game with some of your friends from high school or a youth group conference where you'll be worshiping in song and studying the Bible. Personally, I do not have to imagine these circumstances. I've been given these types of situations for most of my life, and they have pretty much the same things in common. I always had these situations in Sunday school, and they always seem to me very outlandish and not practical at all. Now, I believe there are many good things about our Sunday schools right now, including youth groups, but I also believe that there are many ways in which they can improve. Typically, they're divided up. When you want your children to start thinking, they're divided up into 3 sections. You have about toddler to about 6 years old, and then 6 to about 5th or 6th grade, depending on how the church splits up ages. And then the last group would be your middle schoolers and high schoolers. These areas are typically all pushed under the title Children's Ministries. And while there are many great things happening, again, I believe that there are many things that we must improve on in order to have our children to think more deeply and to be able to live out their theology in very practical ways. Now, the first group, the toddlers to about 6 years old, is typically the easiest group to teach with and provide a curriculum for. I find that many churches do an excellent job in this group. The goal of this group is to start introducing the stories. Have the children get to know God, to get to know who He is and what He's done in His Word. They start to study key figures in the Bible and start to see ways in which these figures had to live out their faith. Basically, you're filling the children with head knowledge, and this is fairly easy to do. There's only one suggestion that I would like to make for this group. Many teachers will simply take what they've been given on the curriculum and read straight from the page. These stories are not boring. They are some of the most exciting ones I have personally ever read. So I have a hard time imagining how these teachers can just read from the book and not look up into these children's eyes with inflection and tone and let the excitement show from their face. There will be boys in your group and they will be super excited about the battle scenes that's in the Bible. Hype on this. It'll get them engaged and have them start listening. Your girls will pay more attention to detail, so start bringing up things that might be interesting. You want to get the children excited about the stories, otherwise they're going to forget and they're not going to remember later on down the road. Again, I think that this is probably the easiest group, and they do most Sunday school teachers do a very good job when it comes to this group. However, I would say we need to work on our inflection and tones. These stories are exciting, and we should let the children know that it's okay to be excited about Bible stories. The next group, about 6th to about 5th or 6th grade, is where I start to see things take a different turn. Now, I've been in some wonderful churches and I've seen many great teachers that will bring in geography, even sometimes language, the Hebrew language or the Greek language into what the children are studying. This is a wonderful idea. It allows the children to see how there's different culture, see different lands, and it lets them know that it's a different time that is very different from how they live now. However, there is something that I do see that I wish was kind of different. I see that the children are still learning and being taught the same lessons they've been taught up to this point. And once you hit about 5th grade, you think you know it all. You think you've heard all the stories and you think you understand where it's going to go. I know. I did this. I grew up in church and I could practically sit in a Sunday school classroom and tell you exactly how the teacher was going to take the lesson. And this was only because I had heard this every single year, the same pattern and the same time. I believe that we need to mix it up a little. I also believe we need to make it a little bit harder for the students. You make it progressively harder every single year. If you teach the same lesson, you need to be adding something new to it. If you set the bar low, children are going to hit it every single time. They are wonderful about going and meeting the expectations you have, so you have to set the bar high. Otherwise, they're not going to be thinking deeply about spiritual matters, and they're just going to clock out every time you say, oh, we're going to talk about a Bible lesson today, because they'll think they know it all. These children are going to be smart, they're going to be creative, and they're going to be so energetic. You have to take that energy and channel it in which they're going to take that excitement to what they're studying. This is very possible. I've seen wonderful teachers do this, and I believe it's possible for every church to have this every time. And I think the hardest group in order to keep engaged would be the middle schoolers and the high schoolers. Again, because typically at this point, they think they've heard every single story. Most churches do a good job about introducing more theology, such as systematic theology, or getting into the more nuances of the Old and New Testament. However, I do think that this is where those scenarios that I talked about in the beginning of this speech, that's where this comes in and it runs rampant. These teenagers know that these scenarios are not practical and they don't fit into everyday life. They sit back, mentally check out, because they think, this isn't going to happen to me, and this isn't anything remotely of what I have to deal with in high schools. You don't tell me how to not swear next to one of my friends because it's the easy thing to do. You don't tell me how to deal with impure thoughts, or if you do, it's in very high theological ways instead of down-to-earth practical ways on how to do it. But I was fortunate to be in a youth group myself where we talked very much so about theology and ways to apply it to our own lives. And again, I understand that every student and every teenager is individual in their thinking, and if they don't want to put anything into these study times, they're not going to get anything out. But I do think it's the Sunday school teacher's job to be able to, again, engage the students, engage the teenagers so that they get excited about these things. Be introducing hard subjects. I know people tend to shrink back when you talk about predestination versus free will, but these are things that these children need to be thinking about. It impacts the way they think and it impacts the way they live. It's very important, I think, in middle school years and teenage years to be able to take the theology they're learning and bring it down into a practical way of living. I've seen some wonderful teachers that are able to do this, but I've also seen teachers that either focus too much on the practical and none on theology, or the other way around. I believe that our Sunday schools are very precious times that should be used extremely wisely. They're times, they're gifts that are given to us by God to take these children for an hour and a half and introduce His Word to them and allow them to study it on their own with some guidance. I think that we've come very far in what it has been, but I think we have very far to go as well. I hope that many Sunday school teachers will begin to realize the Bible is exciting and we can convey this to the children that we're teaching. And I hope that we'll be able to start taking the theology they're learning and teach them to use it in a very practical way.